Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. It is great to have you here. I am batch recording at the moment, so I am either going to sound way too pumped because I'm trying to bring the enthusiasm, or I'm going to start sounding like I'm flagging. I'm hoping it's the first one or even something in the middle as opposed to sounding like I am flagging. But I find that batching is just so useful when it comes to recording my podcast episodes, unless it's something dynamic that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to record this right now. And it's the 3rd of December when I'm doing this. So for me, I just want to be prepped going into December. Obviously, we're going to have so much going on with the build up to Christmas or the holidays, whatever it is that you celebrate or don't celebrate during December. But for us, we celebrate Christmas, and there's obviously so much going on with the kids, school productions and different things. You know what it's like in December. There's just, ice skating happens, and then the different pantomimes, and there's just so much going on that I just want to be prepared for December. So I just want to get episodes batch recorded, created, so then it's just a case of me, maybe editing, writing show notes, things like that, and then making sure that everything is scheduled out. But I often find that once the recording's done, everything else can kind of be done at whatever time of night, or 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. But I find when I just get a good solid bit of time to record, I like to try and crack out as much of the recording as possible. And as I said, being the beginning of December, I just want to know that I've got my recording done for the next few weeks, so I just don't have to stress about it whilst we're running here, there and everywhere and trying to get things organised for Christmas. And then it'll be New Year and we'll be 2024 already, which is absolutely insane to think. But we're not talking about the new year just yet. What we are talking about for this particular episode is what is, in my opinion, the absolute worst way to grow your podcast audience. And this is something that I see time and time again. It's something that I'm very ashamed to say. I thought this was also the way to go back in the day when I started my whole podcasting journey. I have now feel like I have seen the light and I do not do this anymore. But as I said, I feel like this is the worst way that you can possibly grow your audience for your podcast. I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to explain to you why I feel that this particular growth strategy is so bad and detrimental to your podcast. And then I'm going to suggest some things that you can do instead, which may or may not work for you. You don't have to, go for all of them. You might only pick one or two of the strategies, but it just depends on you and your podcast. But there's a bit of background, as there's always background to my I never just come up with these things randomly. There's always a bit of background, and this particular episode was fueled the right word, yeah, fueled, I guess, when I was on Facebook recently. I don't use Facebook too much anymore, but I was on Facebook recently and I saw somebody comment that they only get listens and subscribers on their podcast or to their podcast when they do a subscriber for subscriber or a listen for a listen on a Facebook group. So essentially what they were doing, their strategy, and I know that I'm not doing the video for this, but if you could see me, I'm doing like little air quotes around the word strategy because I don't actually think this is a strategy. But their promotional strategy was to go on to Facebook groups and basically say, if you listen to my episode, I will listen to your latest episode. Or if you subscribe to my podcast, I will subscribe to your podcast. And I kind of died inside when I saw them saying this, because I was like, this isn't a strategy. This isn't a way to build a community around your podcast and to grow your podcast in a sustainable way. Because you think about it, if you're saying to somebody, well, if you listen to my latest episode, I'll listen to your latest episode. Well, first of all, how can you even tell that that person listened to your episode? You could have sat through an hour's worth of their podcast and they haven't listened to even a second of yours. So first of all, you've got the problem that, the transaction may not actually have been completed. Somebody else might not have listened to your podcast. You could listen to 5 other people's podcast episodes and no one's listened to yours. But also, it's the problem that even if somebody does listen to your episode, does that download actually mean anything? Because are they necessarily going to want to organically subscribe to listen to your next however many episodes, or have they just listened to the first 5 seconds so that you can get a download? They hope that you're going to give them a download as well. And then everything's funky dory, because that's not a strategy. And I say that in the kindest possible way, because yes, you might be thinking, yeah, but Verity, if I do that and I get like 10 downloads, that's amazing. I've then got 10 downloads. Yes, but what those people are only doing that and only downloading your episode because they want something in return. They want their own download. And then all that's happening is people are downloading it, but nobody's actually listening for the want of just enjoying the podcast and learning something from the podcast. Does that make sense? It's a fake transaction as far as I'm concerned. And there's no sustainability about it, and it's not going to bring in that proper growth, because as I said, people are only downloading them because they're going to get a download in return. So for me, we need to stop this whole, I'll subscribe to your podcast if you subscribe to my podcast, and I'll listen to your podcast if you listen to mine, and I'll review yours if you review mine. Just no. If you want to listen to a podcast, listen to it. If you want to subscribe to a podcast, subscribe to it. If you want to review it, review it. If you don't want to do any of those things, don't feel like you have to, because it's just wasting everybody's time. And I think you're not getting good feedback then, because how do you know if people are actually enjoying your podcast? And then how do you know that the numbers are actually genuine? You could have like 500 listens to your last episode, but if none of those people are actually interested in your content and they've only listened because they're hoping that they're also going to get a download in return, is that really needed? Like, do you want that? Listen, I'd rather only have 5 downloads for a podcast episode, but know that people actually listened to them because they wanted the information, they wanted the content, than 500 people listening to it just because they want me to give them a download as well. Does that make sense? I don't know, this whole thing. I feel like it's in inverted quote marks, a strategy, because it's not a strategy at all, but it's a strategy that people just need to stop, because you're not going to build a genuine audience in this way. So what can you do instead? Well, in my opinion, the time and energy that you're taking going into these Facebook groups and saying, I'll subscribe to your podcast if you subscribe to mine, here's my latest episode, let me know in the comments if you've listened and then I'll listen to yours, or something like that. Actually put time and effort and energy into a solid promotional strategy. So what do I mean by that? I mean, find out where your audience is and promote to them. And what would be really useful, if you haven't listened to episode 54, the one just before this, go back and listen to that, where I talk about how I promote my podcast on Twitter. I'm not saying you have to use Twitter, it's just an example. And I also discuss what happened when I didn't promote on Twitter for a couple of weeks period, and the significant impact that had on my podcast download. So do check that out. But the point is find out where your audience is and promote to them, not just to random people who are only going to download your podcast episode because they're hoping for some kind of transaction, i.e. you download their episode as well. Also, be original in your content, build a community. It's not easy. I will tell you that it has taken me a long time to figure out A, where my podcast audience is, B, which social media platforms I want to promote my podcast on, 3, actually marrying those two things together, and then also coming up with which kind of content or what kind of content I'm happy posting on social media. Because also, it's not about just constantly saying, here's my latest episode, subscribe to my podcast, subscribe to my podcast, leave me a review and rating. It's not always about that. It is about conversation as well, and having that genuine want to contribute to the community that your audience is sitting in. And I'm also going to recommend that you go back to episode, I can't remember which number it is, but check it out in the show notes. I'll link the number episode, but it was a review that I did after a talk that I attended by marketing mogul Dan Knowlton, where he was saying that the 20% of your marketing, you should be trying something different. Oh, episode 48, I've got it written down in my notes if I just bothered to read. If you want ideas for marketing your podcast, as I said, trying something different for 20% of the time. Check out episode 48. I'll link that down in the show notes. Really, really great episode. But just trying something different and not constantly relying on Facebook groups. Now, I'm not dissing Facebook groups. Facebook groups have got their they've got their place and they can be great for cultivating a community. I'm not saying don't use Facebook groups, but what I'm saying is don't fall down the rabbit hole of doing like for likes and, sharing for downloads, sharing for sharing, all that, all of that. It's about getting people to come and listen to your podcast because they want to listen to your podcast and they want to subscribe. They want to download it, and not because they're going to be getting a download or a subscription in return for that. I feel like I've gone off on a little bit of a rant and tangent on this episode talking about, download for download and subscribe for subscribe and all the rest of it. But I feel like it's an important conversation to have because I feel like a lot of podcasters fall down this rabbit hole of trying to get people to listen to their podcast episodes, and then they wonder, well, why am I not getting any genuine listens when I don't do a listen for listen or a subscribe for subscribe? Why am I not growing my numbers and getting downloads when I don't do that kind of thing? And as I said, it's because it's not actually a marketing strategy. It's not a promotional strategy because there's so much of a transaction that's involved, i.e. the individual who is downloading or subscribing to your podcast is not doing it for the content of your podcast. They are doing it because they want a subscribe or a download in return, which to me, as I said, that's not a growth strategy at all. So as I said, that is, in my opinion, the worst way to grow your podcast audience is to do the whole subscribe for subscribe and download for download, listen for listen, whatever you want to call it, through predominantly, I've seen it happen in Facebook groups. And I would just say, if that is what you are doing at the moment, I would strongly urge you to re-look that strategy, particularly if you are finding that when you don't post in these Facebook groups, when you don't sign up to follow for follow trains and all this kind of thing, if you're finding that if you don't do that, then you're getting no downloads and no listens and no subscriptions, then actually you probably need to look at creating an actual promotional strategy for your podcast, which really focuses on you being original and promoting where your audience is. If you haven't already subscribed to the Lazy Girls Guide to Podcasting, then please give us a subscribe, follow on whichever platform it is that you are on. And otherwise, I will see you next episode. Take care.